Jai Hind, everybody. It's really nice to interact with the youth, and I am particularly pleased because this topic is something very current, something which is very relevant to our testing times, things that are happening today. And I'm not referring only to the Corona crisis. The world is going through an unprecedented crisis during this afflicted by COVID-19. But even before that, when we look at nationalism, hyper nationalism, ultra nationalism, we must understand these words. Understand that between between these phrases or definitions of these, the lines blur, and we have to understand it fully because one is a very good thing, the other one not so good, or let's say excess of anything is bad, so it is something like that. And we need to discuss those issues and how should our behavior be governed by such things, right? And when I say our, I don't necessarily mean in our country only. It perhaps affects the world. And but yes, we as Indians are obviously bound to be concerned by our realities a little more. So this is how we will proceed ahead. So with that, let me just start by reading one sentence. This is in the 19th century Italy. A writer, a thinker, a nationalist of those times. He is known as father of Italian nationalism. He wrote, and I quote, "I love liberty. Perhaps I love it more than life itself." That is what Joseph Mazzini said. He was the father of Italian nationalism. When he wrote this sentence, he was writing from an exile. He was exiled. So he was under punishment. He never got out of that exile. So that was the kind of thing in those days in Europe. But remember that in 20th century, we also had Mussolini from the same very country, who we know what Mussolini did. I don't have to quote him. I don't have to say what, but he felt that nationalism, he says, liberty and freedom are not the values that he actually espoused. He felt and believed and propagated it was Italians above all. That means if you are truly national, then you should think only of your country, was his philosophy, or words to that effect. Now, there lies a difference. What was the difference those days? What was happening those days, especially in Europe, uh, in the 19th, even 18th to some extent, but 19th and 20th century especially, the societies there were struggling for equality, trying to get out of a feudal and aristocratic society. So they were looking more towards values of equality, liberty, democracy, brotherhood, and that is where nationalism was skewed towards it. Yeah, or should I say, nationalism was colored. That it was towards those ends. That was nationalism. Then also nationalism supports a culture of international cooperation. Nationalism is also, remember that nationalism is an integral part of pluralism. Now, let me try and explain these big words. When we say nationalism, let me break it down into very simple parts without getting into bigger things. Let me try and help you with an anecdote. You all must have heard of Swami Vivekanand. Once he was traveling uh, in Japan. He was traveling by a train. You all know that Swami Vivekanand went around the world. He spread the word about Hindu philosophy. His talk in Chicago, in the World Congress, is still available, and it is stuff of the legends. And I suggest to you, recommend to you all, if you anyone has not heard or read about it, please do. Um, so getting back to his travels in Japan, he was traveling in Japan, and he had a very interesting conversation with a fellow traveler, a very learned Japanese man who was traveling with him. And then, when came the time for his meals, when meals were served, it was all non-vegetarian stuff that could be found on the trains there. And he was a pure vegetarian, and then he asked, okay, if I can have some fruits. Well, he couldn't. He just made a remark. Oh, I'm surprised that you can't even get fruit. Well, it's okay. I'm used to fasting, and that's all right. The train stopped at the station where this Japanese co-traveler had to get down. This man ran out of the train with a very hasty goodbye to Swami Vivekanand, ran away. Before the train could start again, he rushed back with a basket of fruits. And Swamiji was very, uh, grateful, taken aback, overwhelmed. And he said that he was profusely thanking him. He said, I was really wondering as to why did you run away in haste. He says, Swamiji, how could I let you go away with the feeling that, oh, in Japan, you don't even get fruits? Because that's what Swamiji had said. That, ladies and gentlemen, is nationalism. Here is a man who just didn't want that feeling to remain, or, a man, a foreigner, to go away with that feeling that in Japan, you don't get fruits. So we have to understand that it is it is a integral part of nationalism, is a part of a larger community. You believe that everyone is in this endeavor together. Citizens value each other's welfare. They value each other's welfare. Nationalism makes people less selfish. It you may not care about, and when I coming back to nationalism, you may not care about all the people in the world, but there is a selective altruism in caring about fellow compatriots. There is a international survey society social survey program, ISSP. They've carried out some surveys. This is a little dated, more than 2 decades ago. It's a Norway based body. And across the board, countries with higher average level of nationalism were consistently wealthier. Normally, one thought that Eastern European countries like Latvia, Slovenia, which most fear that they contain seeds of hyper-nationalism. And I'll just come to hyper-nationalism, what it is. Contrary to conventional wisdom, these countries are actually amongst the least nationalistic of the group. And guess which are the most nationalistic countries as per that survey? The most nationalist countries were Australia, Canada, United States. They scored more. Can anyone guess what it shows? If anyone is ready to give me a one sentence interjection, you are allowed to put on your mic and say what it is. Otherwise, I will speak. Anyone with this survey? It shows that survey shows that actually the countries with a better nationalism quotient were more the wealthier countries, the richer countries, not Latvia, Slovenia. As you know, I'm just reading out that part of survey, somebody's survey. So my point is, the point being made here is that nationalism is a very positive attribute. Now, what is hyper nationalism? It is also known as ultra nationalism. It is extreme nationalism that promotes the interest of one state or one people above all others. should we even call it extreme devotion to one's own nation? But the point is, it is bereft of a set of moral values, whether it was Nazi Germany or Mussolini that we spoke about. We see some examples today also, and it is for us to understand what is hyper nationalism. Hyper nationalism is actually xenophobic. It is authoritarian. It supports, not only it supports authoritarianism, it is also totalitarianism. Now, when we talk about things like this, um, I myself was advising you all that we should not politicize the thing. But then let me explain with the help of few examples. Like we spoke about Germany, we spoke of Italy. What happened during the previous American president's rule? Some of the decisions that Trump took, America first, America first by itself is certainly not a bad slogan. But some of the decisions that they took, some of the steps that he took, whether it was excluding the Mexican and the others, but uh, these are the steps which reek of hyper nationalism. We we see similar examples today across Europe, several countries. Though it can be argued both for and against, but when we look at migrants, similarly, let's narrow down back to our own context. What happens today in our country? We know that in several instances, incidents, movements, agitations, some sections of our crowds have started taking things in their own hands. They believe what they're doing is good for the country. They believe that this must be done this way. Whether it is the incidents that took place in JNU, whether it is incidents that happened in some agitations, some of which are ongoing, then politics steps in, that makes it worse. Then some other lobbies step in, where foreign interests are involved, or uh, based on foreign soil, some diaspora interests are involved. Then the lobbies step in because it is their interest. You are hearing in farmer agitation, we are hearing that okay, there are other interests involved beyond just what is happening over here. The other day we read that how DBT has actually the direct bank transfers to the farmers in Punjab, Haryana, how it has actually helped the farmers in the previous season. But without getting into the politics of it, the idea is to see where does ultranationalism take us, how detrimental it is to us, and how nationalism is such a beautiful thing, whether it is a soldier on the border, whether it is a corona warrior, or whether it is the good Samaritan. And so many of you, young and old, are doing this today. So many people have actually poured even their life savings and they invested their personal self into helping others. So we need more of such examples of nationalism. That is nationalism, where people are selflessly helping others to, whether it is the corona issue, there are people who just go and feed stray dogs because dogs are not getting food in lockdown. Every good act is contributing towards nationalism, because such are the people who will help the community. Everyone helps their family. It is a question of helping beyond the family, the community, the city, and sometimes random strangers. You help people you don't know. When you also make sure that you abide by the ecological norms, you help people you don't know, you help the next generation. That is nationalism. Keeping it alive, or for keeping everything good for the next generation. That would be nationalism. In Norway, in if I'm not wrong, it was early 70s. Yes, it was 71, 72. Early 70s, they struck oil in a very big way. Norway is the fifth largest producer and exporter of oil today. Such a small country. And it has billions of rupees. It has so much money today. It is flush. And Norway is, I've spent a week there, and it is such a rich country, but they've decided that this oil that they have struck, it is not theirs to exploit and use up all, because it belongs to future generations as well. So what have they done? They've done something very unique. They have set up a pension fund. Norway has the best old age care uh, infrastructure in the world. They have a fund which I went there exactly a decade ago. They have a pension fund which I have not updated myself, but it used to be 5 or 6 billion then. It has must have multiplied exponentially. That is the kind, but they've kept it. Why have they kept it? They've kept it for future generations. How many of us will do that? We will all want to spend and make buildings and make live opulently, and why not spend and splurge? Look at Nigeria on the other hand. Same situation. Nigeria struck oil. I'm not sure exactly when. Nigeria is a very oil-rich country. While Norway is a good example, what has Nigeria done? Nigeria, it has only bred oligarchy, corruption, and Nigeria is in pits today. Economy is not too good. The country is in turmoil. There's violence all over. So it's the same resource has been very badly mismanaged. What Norway has done is nationalism. So we must understand the difference between nationalism and ultra nationalism. Ashraf, can I ask you to start?
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
So, sir, I totally agree with whatever you spoke about nationalism as well as hyper nationalism. And I believe that the nationalism is an obligation that every citizen should bear on the face of it. I mean, like, there shouldn't be any contradiction to my nationalism, and there shouldn't be any kind of derogation to it. I'm born as an Indian, and that is what I should die as. There shouldn't be any anti affiliation added to it. And with this, I would just like to throw a very rhetorical, but as well as very relevant in current scenario, a question that what nationalism exactly is. I mean, geniuses like Albert Einstein has termed it as missiles of humankind. By that definition, if we see and try to reflect on what our current country is going through, we see that experiencing an epidemic and the entire pandemic scenario, all of it doesn't only sum up just as a missile, but if we try to extract hyper missile here, that would justify what Mr. Einstein would want to convey. But I totally disagree with him. It's not a missile. I mean, as you mentioned, sir, that nationalism is meant for better goods. Whatever you can dedicate to the country from your end, from your personal end, whatever you can do. It's not like just fighting wars, but even contributing to such a pandemic that we are going through. But yeah, there has been a little narrowed down and negative aspiration added to it, which I fear is not in the good way, and the light is becoming a little dark. That is, if I'm not wrong, around the Uri attacks, Indian when we had a similar kind of counterattacks carried out in Pakistan, a lot of derogatory languages, signs, and even media panelists were speaking about all of this derogation subjected to Pakistan. But that was their kind of nationalism, which I fear is not in the right mood. I mean, we just don't need to get derogatory to prove how wealthy a nationalism tag we hold. So that is one thing I disagree with, the notion of nationalism that has been added just recently. And coming from a community which is every time put into a spectrum of suspicion of anti-nationalism, I believe that whatever the changes have been taken, like for the past years, there have been a lot from and up, apart from my community as well as the other sides, be it calling out national slogans such as Bharat Mata Ki Jai, or calling out national anthem of Jana Gana Mana. I believe that there is no religious connotation added to it. Being whatsoever my religion attribution carries, I am an Indian, and Bharat Mata is very much severe and close to me, so I will always wear it as an badge of honor. These notions are just ridiculous and to divert the idea of nationalism. Like, I certainly believe, and this is a lot more spoken about in media, that a lot of, like, particularly my community, that is the Muslim community, they at times do rejoice the celebration of Pakistan, and yeah, to a small fraction that does happen. But this is where a little bit of anti-national feeling is portrayed, and with this I believe that the subject of derogation takes place, and that only becomes when on a larger basis, that is what becomes very tough and hardened. And today what we are facing, I mean, like, we are not anti-national, there's nothing as such existent. I believe, as I already mentioned, that this is the badge of honor every Indian should wear, or if concerned, the entire global population. But we need to analyze. Now, just to highlight my latest claim, I would just like to read out a case in relation to the CANRC. So this is from Bangalore, Hubali, and this is under Bar Association, which had earlier passed a resolution prohibiting its member from appearing as counsel of defense for 3 college students who have been accused of raising pro-Pakistan slogans while staging an anti-CA protest in the hostel. Now, the charge has not yet been proved, but my question is, in a country where somebody like having the onus of rape case, murder, why not it be the culprits of Nirbhaya case? They all had a legal representation, so why can't somebody just accused, not yet proven, of raising anti-national slogans can ensure the same? So this is, I mean, where it is getting toxic. And as a millennial, it scares me, it haunts me from various aspects. I believe that nationalism shouldn't be an idea prescribed with a certain community or a group. Nationalism is very broader concept, is a very broader concept, and the application it holds is also very wise, as well as okay, sorry, there was a little diminution, I would just continue. I mean, I believe that there's a little diminution to whatever is the idea of nationalism prescribed. Everybody can hold their own views and practices that they believe is nationalist, and in the charge, I mean, whatever and a true nationalist should look like is not the one who is just conveying my country right or wrong, but one who says that my country, for which I belong to, for which I must do, and that is what is right or what is wrong. That I mean, I should have the rationale to describe what is right and what is wrong for my country, and that is my point of nationalism. And coming towards the hyper-nationalist aspect, I believe that the nationalism, the hyper-nationalist wear on their sleeves is a little misfunctional. I mean, they do much better.
Ashraf, if you can wind up in next minute or so.
Yes, this is my just concluding line. So I believe they do much better for the country they claim to, and instead of just locating patriotism where it should, I mean, from a social media or a derogatory perspective, it should be located where it basically belongs to, and that is in the hearts and the minds. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashraf. Thank you. That was well said. I must, before I move to the next, and I'm going to ask Shambhavi, I will ask you to speak next. Is that all right? So before I make a comment, right? All right. So now, Ashraf, I want to say to you to something that you said, that Muslims are also Indians, and they are absolutely, and I must tell you one thing. My parents came from from Pakistan, and I lived in Agra during my childhood in not predominantly, fully Muslim locality, because that's where we got houses in. So I'm from Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry. We have half of my soldiers are Muslims. I've kept Rosa along with them during Ramzan. Let me also, because of this, I have I've sort of lived in those areas, interacted where people live harmoniously together. I don't see any difference. Even in Kashmir, where there are problems, Aditya is here. If if the Kashmiri Pandits, anyone goes back to his village, to his this thing, they are often treated with great love and care, respect. Individually, people to people, we really don't have problems. Whether it is Lucknow or Kashmir or Kargil or Hyderabad, we just don't have problems, and that is a very heartening sign. And it is only when politics comes into it, when you said that people of my generation, as a millennial, you feel disturbed. uh, it is only when the politics comes into it, and who it is up to us that we don't let ourselves be politicized. You can have a political view for elections and parties and everything, but not at the cost of your personal, your family lives. So remember, you all millennials and everyone else, you have to be more discerning, not fall into the trap. It's easy for me to say it. There are a lot of people who are not educated, they will fall for it. That is what vote banks are all about. But remember, things are improving. I don't know what is the literacy rate today. I think it's upwards of 80, 90, somewhere there. When India got independence, it was 17%. So you can understand the difference. The gap is so much. So we things are improving, but I just thought, because this point was very important, and I just needed to emphasize that with you. Right. So Shambhavi, I note the time. Your time starts now.
Despite the fact that the word hypernationalism has numerous translations, it tends to momentarily expressed as blind nationalism towards one's country. It is a faith in the predominance of one's country and its way of life. Meaning of patriotism has gotten so inflexible and be called hypernationalism. The sensation of us versus them, now and then, may take wrong turns. It involves itself a lot of repercussions, which popular government in the past have paid for, and compromise the eventual fate of the non-industrial countries as well. Hypernationalism itself contains a feeling of danger, which it presents on society, commonwealth, and economy also. Disharmony in the public eye, distress in minority, social clashes between among individuals, which eventually prompts annihilation of duties and anarchy. It mitigates the very idea of democracy. Hypernationalism and patriotism can be confused sometimes, but the two are very different things. Patriotics and nationalists love their country. This can be seen in their pride and willingness to defend it. However, nationalism do not feel the need to dominate other countries or display the superiority of prevalent in nationalists. This can be seen in French Revolution in the way that the Napoleon Bonaparte worked to spread the enlightened ideas of the French throughout Europe by force. The French Revolution is a perfect example of nationalism at play. There have been historical experiences too. Let's talk about Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles was considered to become a liberal trump based on 14 points. However, during the negotiation in Paris, most of the Wilson's proposition was profoundly amended and surprisingly dismissed. European powers were less interested in the establishment of an ideal international order, but focused on the national interest and security considerations. As a result, the post-World War I served international order critical weak points: misbalance of force, German revanchism, League of Nations dead end. The Great Depression was the most exceedingly awful monetary decline in the historical backdrop of the industrialized world enduring from 1929 to 1939. Adolf Hitler, the Holocaust. During the 1930s, Hitler came to power by projecting hypernationalism on distressed Germany. When Hitler came to control, the idea of hypernationalism moved to Nazism, which led to World War II. The world has seen hypernationalists like Hitler of Nazi and Mussolini of fascist Italy. Both of these became a part of genocide of Jews to make their countries purely Aryan. Yet, I'd like to bring upon a condition in such circumstances, that is, blind patriotism towards one's nation. One such individual is Adolf Eichmann. He was a German high authority who assisted Germany with doing the mass homicide of just about 6 million Jews during World War II. He turned into a questionable theme when he said something to pro Nazi writer that he committed an error by not killing the European Jews, that is, all the European Jews. At this point, when he was captured by Israeli Secret Service, he was not once seen as blameworthy of his activities. Further added, that he said, following the order out of obedience because of his failure to think from someone else's perspective, he didn't feel how to dealt with what is implied. He turned out to be oblivious in regards to the point he was unable to make any ethical decisions. I would want to bring upon a very controversial topic. I do not present any conclusion on the same, but I would like to present it before you all. That is Nathuram Godse. According to him, in assassinating Gandhiji, Nathuram gave his otherwise ordinary life a new meaning. This was perhaps the reason why he pleaded with the government not to show him mercy and send him to the gallows. He had sacrificed himself for promoting the idea of militant Hinduism. Godse acquired esteem through the assassination of Gandhi. Undoubtedly, Godse was a misguided patriot, fired by a rabid love for motherhood. This is a true of New Age followers. His love, as also that of his followers, is destructively obsessive. They can neither accept competing ideas in religious calm nor the free choice of the other. I am not calling this move a patriotic or hyper nationalist. It has arrived watcher to have a resolution equivalent. Let's talk about Donald Trump. President Donald Trump, during his discourse in Texas, said he was a proud nationalist and he utilized it to balance himself with past presidents who arranged economic accords, non aggression treaties, and migration laws, all of which includes the interest of different countries notwithstanding with their own. Trump made it his business to duplicate all of the above. He often recounts how he has complimented leader of Japan and China and other world powers in the pursuit of national interest. We should be more assertive about serving our own, he says. So using the word nationalist can be taken to refer as distinctively American ideal of melting pots of races, ethnicities, and faiths. But to some, it is close to the more racist or to be comfortable. Those who believe in their country's superiority are sometimes called Chauvinistas, a name that may have originated with the history of French soldier who was blindly loyal to Napoleon that went on defending the emperor long after his downfall. Trump's America First policy is the obvious indicator of hyper-nationalism, which makes a great deal of misery to the rest of the world. Further, the US chooses to pull out from the Paris Agreement a change accord. That is a genuine danger of the group of people yet to come fighting that the understanding would sabotage the US economy and put US in the difficult spot. I would want to talk about hyper-nationalism that has been playing around with vaccination. There are about 8.6 billion portions that has been requested around the world. 6 billion doses has just been requested by the rich nations, which only amounts to 20% of the total population. What might be said about the rest 80%, which includes developed and developing nations? One of the articles from The Economist expresses that in the excess of 85 poor nations won't have far and wide access to COVID antibodies before 2023. There's a high vaccine dissimilarity. Why there is not a single vaccine maker in the entire continent of Africa and Latin America? Here is the motivation behind why one of the vaccines has been created by rich nations and vaccines are locked by patents. Until major pharma companies waive off patents, we cannot imply production. WHO created a technology pool in 2020 called COVID-19 pull/tap. The thought was to support the plan of vaccine with the nations. Many countered, like India, Norway, and in excess of 30 other nations pursued this. However, Pfizer excused the cooperation, calling it dangerous and nonsense. The US states patent pulling in mid-May 2020 in any event when others didn't have the vaccine. Nations like Pakistan, Ghana, and South Africa called for people's vaccine, yet Trump organization went against the thought. October 2020, India and South Africa proposed the possibility that the license ought to be deferred off to WTO, later upheld by the UNAIDS and WHO, and afterwards energy gets scored by rich countries. For example, European Union, which excuses concerning IPRs and boundaries to coronavirus medication and innovation. Across the board, the point I'm attempting to make is this hyper-nationalism helping nobody? Patents were not amplified for crisis. It's time to joint effort and participation. It's an opportunity to put individuals before benefit. Else it would bring a worldwide economic breakdown. Licenses and patents are for recovering R&D costs. We as a whole realize different rich people contributed. There has been various funding to the research. There have been 8 conversations in WTO for patent barrier. Passing the proposition needs to help 164 individuals in the excess of 100 individuals. Countries are supporting it alongside India. I want to talk a bit more on the South China, China the Chinese aggression of South China. Indo-Pacific is a biographic locale of Indian Ocean interconnecting two water bodies. That is the Indian Ocean, the Western and Focal Pacific Sea, and the land masses that encompass them. For just about 20 years, the expression Indo-Pacific has broadly been utilized in the international affair. China has been a danger to Asia Pacific nations and now posing threats to region in Indian Oceans as well. In any case, China has progressing strife with ASEAN nations concerning the South China Sea. China says it has power over practically all South China islands and their neighboring waters. It hasn't characterized those waters. However, it gave a guide that has what is known as nine dash line that plunges down past Vietnam and the Philippines and towards Indonesia, enveloping basically the entirety of South China Sea. China has been building army installation on artificial island in the areas in which part is guaranteed by Borneo, Malaysia, and Philippines. Beijing has blocked business movements like fishing and mineral investigation by neighboring nations as of late. For example, the Strait of Malacca is the most significant transportation channel among the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, and it adds significance from the monetary and God's perspective. China paradoxically has subverted trust with its neighbor as of late. I might want to end my discourse by citing David Ricardo's statement: if all the states tries to maximize their economic invest, then the whole world will benefit from it. Global wealth will lead to global peace. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shambhavi. That was a very a very wide spectrum that you've covered over there, and well researched, well prepared, and it was very educative. Um, I really liked your giving an analogy, an example of Nathuram Godse's militant Hinduism was a very bold one, and also about the vaccine nationalism. Perhaps we'll talk about vaccine nationalism in the end, because that is going to have different connotations. The world is going to talk about it, and world is going to behave very differently given this crisis. So we'll keep this alive, all of you. We'll talk about this in the end.
Thank you so much, sir.
All the best. Bye bye. Now, Shubodh.
Okay, good evening, sir. My name is Shubho HM. I am from Hindu College, BA Honors Political Science first year. Talking about nationalism, I want to start with the meaning. Nationalism, according to me, is love a person who love his country, his tradition, his culture, and and more importantly, as you told in your introductory remarks, the way he helps the others, not absolutely one needs to help take care of his family, but that's the responsibility. But where takes care of people who is around them, no, that's nationality, and that's nationalism for you. He is help by helping people. He is not only making taking care of them. He is even saving many people. Which we see in the current pandemic situation. That is one thing, and national. He is also a person who absolutely loves his country, but at the same time he does not hesitate in raising his voice against something which is not right. That is nationalism, according to me. And this the aspect of hyper nationalism, people who love their country, who uh, they don't have any they keep the interest of their country above everything. Interest of their community, their group, or their organization, like that. In the example, so in India, the people of if people who have the feeling of everything is, they follow hyper nationalism in sense ki they don't have any disregard to the their country. They don't whatever is happening in the country, or whatever their community, or the people whom they like are doing. If they they are doing, they don't have any dislike to it, they don't critically think about it, or raise voice against it, and raise voice against it, I know, and just follow them blindly. That's a hyper nationalism, according to me. And hyper nationalism has many threats to democracy. Has threat is a big threat to democracy, because it will take away the main issues, according to me. One is that, and which we see in the recent past and the current situation also. And hyper nationalism also, they are try, especially in India, it tries to divide the country on the basis of uh, communal lines, religion lines, with as it is being fueled by the media and politics also, uh, which helps them to this is basically my what I want to say is that media and politics helps the this dividing the country on the basis of communal lines, and they don't tolerate anything, whatever the thing, whatever they think, they have the very rigid mindset. That is not something which we want, and any hyper nationalism will not take the country forward in any manner. So people should try to be national, should know the meaning of nationalism, pure nationalism, so that we move forward in the move forward in a better way, and be better people, and our country in a true manner. That's my thanks.
Thank you, Shubodh. Thank you very much. That was very concise and very correct. You were very correct in bringing out the differences in our understanding of the terms. Thank you. Kushi, can I ask you to step to the plate?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Khushi, and I'm currently pursuing Masters in Political Science from Delhi University. So, I'm going to stress more on basically how nationalism has evolved through these decades. So, for that, I would like to cite the article Pathology of Hypernationalism by Joseph Sidney Verlin. So, what he does is he basically highlights the distinction between contemporary nationalism and traditional nationalism. So, he argues that older nationalism was basically an instrumentality primarily of the rising middle class, and their aim was either the breakdown of aristocratic landlord domination or national independence or internal political and economic unity. And for these purposes, democracy and civil liberty served as useful tools, while the newer kind of nationalism has become synonymous with stabilization of the very class relationships and internally, and basically expansion of control and territories externally. So, what does current discourse on nationalism entail? I mean, what's the context that we're currently living in, and what kind of nationalism or hyper nationalism we are facing? So, we can notice, like, all around us, we've seen that, like, General Dua sir also talked about politicization of religions, and when politics comes in, things get muddy, right? So this is something we've been experiencing currently: politicization of religions, imposition of a uniform identity, which is basically a homogenizing characteristic of the current form of nationalism. And I believe that shunning any sort of critical engagement with the history, religion, or even the history of the country is something which goes against the very purpose that a nationalism can serve. And like, this is something which I would like to highlight. There is a fine line between nationalism and hyper nationalism, as speakers before me have already mentioned. And hyper nationalism occurs when there is a bid to create a sense of us versus them mentality, and basically bifurcating the people between loyal and disloyal. So, while the definition of nationalism in this form becomes extremely exclusionary, and wherein you constantly constantly try to identify some sort of enemy, And this is where I would like to move on to distinguishing European nationalism versus Indian nationalism. So, European experiences with nationalism was quite different. They, like those countries or those, their idea of nation state was based on uniformity and homogenization. They had uniform identity. Therefore, it was fairly easy for them to establish a common nation, common ideals, and common morals to build upon. While our country or multinational countries like India have different nationalities within itself, and the kind of diversity and plurality we have, this is something which was cherished when we started out with our liberation struggle, right? And this is something I believe is equally important to till this date, because acknowledging that plurality and working towards preserving it goes a long way. And however, unfortunately, we are seeing that this is undergoing serious changes in recent years. So, what I believe we need is rethinking of the whole concept of nationalism. I believe there is no one size fits all kind of nationalism, and it differs in every country and context. The definition that worked for the West might not work at all for India, which is what we're seeing right now. So now I would like to turn my focus on when does nationalism turn into hypernationalism. So when leaders of states are able to convince people that they have somehow been treated abusively by the other, or that members of our group who live outside our borders need to be incorporated into the homeland. That is a clear identification of enemy or us versus them mentality. Sometimes a group or religious community or ethnicity living within the country are also painted as evil or root of all the problem, or are basically tagged as impure, which also results in ethnic or subnational conflicts within the country. So, moving on to the concluding part of my speech, I think what we need is a major rethinking of the concept of nationalism. But how do we prevent it from becoming a dogma or take the form of hypernationalism? So, what we can do is we have to collectively work towards giving a positive reorientation to the concept. And how does it happen? We have to stress more on diversity and plurality because it works best for a country like India, and it will serve best, like the concept of nationalism can thrive best in if we make sure that it suits our context. And allowing dissent and discourse is something which is extremely crucial, because I believe recognizing weaknesses is the first step to improve and become a better nation. And at this point, I would like to highlight the difference between nation and state. State refers to government and other institutions which run the country. Nation, by contrast, is a psychological characteristic, something that Benedict Anderson also refers to as an imagined political community. Why do I stress on this distinction? Is because you I believe that you can criticize the government if you think that the government is failing at its job, because government has a role to be accountable to the people. And the concept of nation is something which is more emotional or more close to our hearts. This is a way in which we relate to other people, and that becomes extremely important, that we keep that association positive, and we do not let it get toxic. So I believe that nationalism should not be the be all and end all of everything. It should act as a means to achieve greater goals. When we give heightened emphasis on nationalism, we tend to overlook various other things that need our attention. This shifting of focus can be a hindrance to the path of development, and dangerous, especially during the times of these. As Shambhavi also highlighted regarding vaccine diplomacy and vaccine nationalism, which is a dangerous trend in the current times. But on the flip side, we can also see positive trends because of this very nationalism, wherein an entire country comes together and the medical workers and staff are and doctors are literally working so hard to save our lives. So what I believe is that we need to associate nationalism with love for the country and most importantly for the people. So, demonizing someone else to make our nation look better and punishing everyone who voices dissent can't be a way forward if we are to realize the goal of a developed country inhabited by an enlightened set of people. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kushi. And that was a well prepared and a good analytical talk. I specifically do appreciate your comparison between the European nationalism and Indian nationalism, as you call it. But basically, you were comparing that there is multinationalism in India as it is compared to the homogeneity, comparative homogeneity in what are European countries. We must also remember that when we say European countries, India, the Indian states are roughly the size of their countries, or some even bigger. So we are somewhat like that. Yeah, but that's a good example. And you talking about the nation and state difference. I'm glad you brought that out, and that understanding is also very important. Over to you, Sanya.
So I'd like to talk about how, like, everybody's like before me mentioned the ideas of what a nation looks like, what everything looks like, and I think somewhere or the other I sort of agree and disagree on some planes, definitely. So starting off with what a nation looks like, I think nation is an imagined community, and that is very different, like, from a state, because state is like more political, but nation exists on a community level, right? So people who are a part of a nation, all those people can never even get to meet each other, but what binds these people together, essentially, when we talk about country like India, which is so geographically so diverse, so since these people have so many different characteristics, so many different lives altogether, ranging from culture, heritage to even topography for that matter, everything around them is very different. So there is only so much that they can relate with each other, but what makes this, country be together, feel together, and when we identify and gives us an identity, I think that is the fact that we all belong to a same nation, the fact that when we go outside and we represent ourselves, so it's always like I'm an Indian, although like the India is like, a salad bowl, which is differently very different from like a melting pot. I think India is definitely a place wherein everybody has their own regional identity, and they respect it as much. But I think on a national level, the fact that we all can relate with the identity of being Indian, I think that's really big. So nationalism is an ideology which claims that, that strengthens the concept of a nation, right? So nationalism tells us, and this is reiterated also by different symbols, by different folklores, even like when somebody told us about Bharat Mata here, there are also national songs that we relate to, a national figure, probably because since the time we actually were like a state and a nation, so we probably have Mahatma Gandhi as our national figure, which we can relate towards, and like a national map, which gives us more of a, physical sense of being together. So I think nationalism has like other tangible figures in the form that it manifests itself into, but this whole feeling of being together essentially becomes very important in a country that is so big and so diversified. So the only thing that brings us together is the nationalistic element of this. But I just think that there's a very small difference between hyper nationalism and patriotism, because since all of this lies on a similar sort of spectrum. So patriotism probably is just your love for the country, your dedication for the country. And even sir gave us a lot of examples about how being a good Samaritan looks like, being selfless for the country looks like. I think that if it were up to me, I would classify it under patriotic, because your dedication stems out of pure love for your country and pure passion for your country. And I think how we talk about other people out there helping the country in times of need, like now, I think that is merely because of the fact that you are attached to your country, you relate with the country, and the sense of being one. So I think that becomes very important. But how it's different from being a nationalist or hyper nationalist is little different, because a patriotic person might probably say that, okay, I love my country and I appreciate it and I relate with it and I'm very loyal to it. But probably a nationalist person would do the same, but would also defend the wrongs of the country, which sometimes also happens and becomes a little problematic for us, because when we try to gauge and navigate all these instances. Also, when we look at the symbols that we all identify with as a nation, sorry, let it be Bharat Mata, let it be anything at all, I think most of these, even the concept of a Ram Rajya, I think most of these concepts are a little tilting towards the majority community, if you look at it, because not everybody in the country can relate with this, right? There are some elements, like we can't disagree that this whole concept emerges from Hinduism, and obviously when we talk about our country, we can't really forget about when the partition happened, it was based on socio-religious and linguistic socio-religious lines. So obviously there was a disproportionate demography here and there, but the idea of our nationalism is inherently a little more socio-religious, and obviously that also makes up for the fact that not all communities at the same level can relate with that idea. So that might have like some communities in the country itself might also have an issue with relating with those figures and those instances, those folklores, because of the fact that they just don't relate themselves with that, right? Nationalism also is something that has always existed, right? And that is the only reason why we were able to collectivize, and even during, like, when we even if we trace that from 1857 till now, I think that nationalism is not something that is emerging just now. I think that was the main purpose how we got independence. The commonality that we shared that time was the fact that we all were under a colonial rule. So now I think there are different things by which we identify with each other. So it has always sort of existed that there's like a certain rule that we were all under, and oppressive, and that was oppressive, and that oppression made us get together and fight against the Britishers, right? So when we talk about this and what we have seen these days, which is a little dangerous, is the emergence of hypernationalism, which is characterized by various different features, and something that people also before me talked about, that centers around the superiority of a nation. Obviously, when we talk of a nation, you have to think of a nation as a great nation, but when it comes in a comparison of you versus me, and comes in an ethnocentric background, not nothing cosmopolitan, and sort of it's a little chauvinistic when you say that my nation is better than yours because everybody has a superior idea for their nation. I think my nation is better than your nation, and how the superiority of your nation supersedes any wrongs done by your nation sometimes, which is obviously up to us to identify that. I think that becomes a very big problem in hypernationalism, because you go to different ends to sort of justify even the wrongs that your country has, and obviously every democracy, every nation has some certain problems, and that is a given. I think that is for every country that exists, right? So, but when that identifying certain common enemy symbols, or classifying people as nationalists or anti-nationalists, if they sort of deflect from that nationalist narrative of yours, is a part of hyper-nationalism. We take the example of how, like, certain, like, when there was a political change in the parties, like some time ago, I think there were certain things that they talked about, and how they talked about how they try to, like, belittle the rule of the other party before them, try to like say how they were people who were Muslim appeasing, how they were casteist, and how they want to do away with all of that. So identifying a common enemy, and then giving a nationalist narrative of what our nation would look like. Probably our nation would look like somebody who gives a sacred status to, for example, cow, right? So giving us certain sort of sacred status to different other elements, and cultural homogenization in one way is, I think, something that is also a sort of hypernationalism, because anybody who tries to deflect from that narrative and say that, oh, probably I do not believe in that, for example, I do not believe that uh, uh, XYZ thing can do me any good. For example, when it was COVID, and then people were talking about, Gomutra. I don't believe in that ideology inherently. But then at certain times, you are also labeled as anti-national for that. And I think that is hyper-nationalism, because you can't really define what my nation means to me, or how I sort of try to relate with my nation. Nationalism, hyper-nationalism has certain factors, I think, which can be clamping down criticism just because you believe in one narrative and not listening to the other. It can be excessive control. It can be like majority narrative deciding for other people, and you imposing that narrative on other people, and the strengthening of a soft power and leading to cultural homogenization. Nationalism then versus now. I think nationalism as a concept was the only thing that was possible, and that was the starting point for making us independent, and the feeling of being together, and the sense of being against the colonizers, and being together and identifying each other as each each other. Nationalism, however, was never without a certain socio-religious sort of manifestation, and that is something that we agree with. Because like even when our country got independent, it was on religious lines, and the symbols that we used to like identify, like Bharat Mata and all of this, was something had a religious connotation to it always. But although there was never a call by Subhash Chandra Bose or Nehru or Gandhi or all of our independent leaders to go back to Vedic age or anything. There was no rhetoric as such to go back to a Hindu Rashtra or something. I don't think that was anywhere an ideology during that time. But I think that what we are seeing right now is more of a majority narrative rather than an inclusive one, and I think that is a little more needed. For example, we talk about how hypernationalism looks like. I think there are certain instances I would like to characterize it as that is a commitment to will at all costs and prove one's superiority vis-a-vis the other. While we all can exist on the same plane and have our own ideas, I think that the obsession of your idea being better than everybody else is one obsession that we deal with. A leader with a nationalist mandate, in a hyper-nationalist mandate or agenda, will feel entitled to sort of break laws, and the spirit of nationalism would end up acting as an excuse to, like, for example, mobilize people in the name of nationalism. It also gives rise to ethnocentrism, I believe, in one sense, because it gives to an idea of cultural superiority. So your culture is better than my culture. I don't think that we can say that, because the argument of cultural relativism then comes in. It also tends to give rise and sort of validate the idea of majoritarianism and believe in the fact that majority should be appeased, often overlooking the needs of those who are minority in the state. So, for example, when you talk about the mandate that we cannot consume beef, for example, in the country, I think that discounts people who are from other communities, like for instance Muslim communities and people from the lower caste, because they have always been in a part of such a community, who've always consumed these things, and vilifying them by a mandate or a law becomes a little hyper nationalistic in a sense, because they are also part of the nation, and I don't think that you can decide what their definition of nationalism looks like on the basis of their food habits per se. I think what really becomes problematic in hypernationalism, as we've talked about, is also a real sort of manifestation that comes in. I think this is all like talking about on a very political or a social realm. But if we talk about it in real life, we talk about vaccine hypernationalism. So when the country was going through like tough times, like we still are, I think when they talked about not getting Pfizer in, but like allowing your own vaccine or waiting on your own vaccine rather than saving a few people, I think that was also an example of what hypernationalism looked like essentially. But I think that is more of a danger to the country and would not really manifest into anything as such as a benefit, rather than the theory of nationalism or love for a country would otherwise. With that, I think I'd like to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanya. Well done, Sanya. Well spoken. I beg your pardon. Well spoken, and you brought out some things very well. Maybe we'll have more time for discussion. But when you talk of, I like that concept or thing that you put forward. A nationalist will justify the wrongs of his country, or words to that effect, even if something is done wrong, wrongs or excesses. A nationalist will justify. A patriot is different. Soldier is a patriot. Every citizen is a patriot, but I like the way you put that. And thank you. That's a very good distinction to take. That there will be other interpretations, but that's a very good one to take. I want to correct you a little bit so that people don't go on the wrong impression. You said it twice, in fact, not once. You said our partition, if India was formed also on social religious lines. You all must understand. Pakistan was formed on religious lines. They said they wanted to have a Muslim state. And that is why they said, okay, these areas where there are Muslim enclaves or the Muslim population is more, and then migrations took place. India did not say that Muslims have to go out. In fact, there are more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan. So what I'm trying to say, let us all not understand. We did not want, and nor do we still want, a Muslim, a religious, a country on religious lines. For us, Muslims are as equally welcome, and there's a huge percentage of population. They are in all high places everywhere. So that's certainly not the thing. I just want to correct that when you talk about it. This vaccine thing, that and I'm addressing everybody now. That's a good point she raised. We'll talk about vaccine when there are some who said that Indian vaccine, we must wait for the Indian vaccine, or Indian vaccine should be used. It'll be better than others and all that. So that is, did you say it is hyper nationalism, right?
Sir, just to clarify, this said that not getting another vaccines like Pfizer and, for example, Johnson
Yes.
Johnson
Yes.
is on the basis of the fact that you're waiting on your own.
True. True. So that you are saying is an example of hyper nationalism. I agree with you. That is something that I want us all to remember. We will discuss this when Anima, the last speaker, has finished speaking. Okay, with that, Anima, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Sanya.
Thank you, sir. Very good evening, everyone. And Lieutenant General Satish Dua, sir, it's an honor to speak in front of you, first of all. I begin by saying that first and foremost, nationalism, which is basically a European concept, has been like the hat on various heads as far as its conceptual clarity is concerned. If for the time being, I attest to the definition that was given by Professor Hans Kohn, which says that nationalism is a state of mind in which the supreme loyalty of the individual is felt due to the nation state. At the same time, I bring in the explanation of Professor C.J.H. Hayes, which says that nationalism is not an inborn characteristic, and the individual's feeling that he belongs to one nation is the result of continuous process of social learning and habit forming. Then the case of Indian nationalism can be viewed from the above angle as being evolved as a result of our conquest against colonialism. On the other hand, hypernationalism, in my sense, refers to a state of mind in which people start identifying their interest with the nation, and for them, the nation means the government or their own community. So in that case, the people are ready to go past anything to prove that they are nationalist, and critical discourse at this point of time faces a casualty. This makes me think of a situation. I think of a soldier who is ready to give the supreme sacrifice of his life for the sake of his own compatriots, the pride of the nation, and the sovereignty of India, without any discrimination. And on the other hand, we find instances of people hurting each other and attacking each other in the name of community, and they think that this is what their nation is. They are doing it for nationalist sentiments, and this should be the correct way to go about things. So a high paradox can be seen in the nature how it is seen. So in my opinion, the nationalism versus hyper-nationalism thing should not be viewed on this thing that the former one is the only positive force behind the democracy, and the latter one is the antithesis to that. Because the stark realities of the present time is like, it's like the nature of nationalism in India is changing its meaning and its form. The people are becoming hyper-nationalist, and they think, or are being influenced to do that, and they think that they are working on the precipice of nationalism. So that creates a problem. Now, another thing I would like to point out is that nationalism creeps in all the issues, whether it is an economic issue, a social issue, defense-related issue, or it is regarding the government policy. What happens, the resultant effect of this is nationalism becoming a major force behind political doctrine, and as a result, people turning hyper-nationalist. The ill effects of these are insecurity in the minds of minorities, justice and fraternity being impeded, and democratic values being jeopardized, which should not happen. Now, at this point, I would like to raise the who and what question. I suggest that in the post-independence era, the 1947 era, nationalism being viewed as not the monopoly of a single culture. It was an amalgamation of different, unique identities which constituted the beauty, the essence of India. But of late, what is happening? That there is an assumed monopoly of activities, of particular activities, which are related to particular communities, and this is propagated in large number, whether it is explicitly propagated or implicitly propagated. The growing hyper-nationalism can be viewed I would like to give the evidence from this thing, that what is anti-national? The answer to what is anti-national has become very broad. There are many things that can be considered anti-national, and that should not happen. Some instances in this regard are that only 2.2% of the people convicted under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act faced conviction in the court, and this was as per the report of the Union Home Ministry in Rajya Sabha. Clearly, the voice of the dissenters are facing the brunt in these current times. The intelligentsia, or whether it is the students, they are facing the brunt in a way. Then, India has seen many protests. Many protests are ongoing, and we have had former protests. So, in the case of farm laws or the CA and RC protest, the issue of Khalistani demands and terrorist funding, respectively, were raised through the social media platform and the popular narrative. Again, cow vigilantism and the ruckus which it has created and has been creating also highlights how cultural symbols are becoming arguments of one being a nationalist. When I would also like to point that when media largely becomes a biased mouthpiece, who will hold the beacon of making the people aware and less hostile in their views? Who will sensitize them with what should be the feeling? We all have good feelings for our compatriots, but there are instances which not only affects those group of 10 people who were involved in that instance, but a large part of view chain of emotions is created because of that, and this is what I feel. Now, the lack of critical discourse and its acceptance has failed us to realize our own loopholes and correct it, and this creates an unwanted situation. And that unwanted situation is that organizations like Freedom House reporting us to be partly free. This is an unwanted situation. Now, we agree to it or not, that should not come into the picture. But the thing is, the people of India should have that capability to address their own issues, to identify them, and not to blindly see whatever is happening. Because after all, somewhere I feel that if you're doing good to your nation and the people, and that itself in itself is nationalism, whether you speak or not. Thus I believe that the line between the definition of nationalism and hyper-nationalism has become blurred, and whether you are a nationalist or a hyper-nationalist, the question is whether your actions are justified enough to uphold the fraternity of India, to uphold the secular nature, and whether it is justified enough to call that you solemnly resolve to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic as enshrined in the preamble of our constitution. And this is where I lay and I give this question to every one of us, with all the varied views that we have and with all the interpretations that we can bring into this. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Anima. That was a very animated talk and a very Joshila talk. Well structured, very well brought out. I like your boldness to bring out, talk about the various protests, the farm laws, CA, and the fact that they were interjected with the Khalistani slogans and funding, etc. That is exactly what we all have to watch out for. And, also cow vigilantism. Now, you all remember, you'll all recall that when I finished speaking in the beginning, I was about to say something, and then I said, no, let me say that in the end. Do you all recall that? Yeah. And now that's what I'm going to talk about, because now you'll realize why I sort of held myself back. So I'm going to speak on a slightly different but a connected topic, and with or shall I say relevant to what we are discussing. After that, I will give you all a minute or a minute and a half to react on that. Give your reactions on that. All right? Okay. Now, don't think that I'm just going away from the topic. Just hear me out. When I was a teenager, to listen to the news, I switched on the radio. Radio, not transistor. A radio, I don't know if your generation wouldn't even know what a radio is. A radio has a radio valve. It's not transistor. It's not the FM that you put on and starts on. When a radio valve is like a bulb. Okay, there were no transistors then. Transistor, yes, of course. When I was teenager, just about then the transistors made an appearance in the country, and they were expensive and they were not. So radios, a radio is it has a valve. It's like a small bulb. It actually has an filament and it glows. So after I switched it on, after one switched on the radio valve would come on. It took a couple of minutes for it to come to the right amount of heat and glow, and then it would connect, and then slowly you could tune. There was a needle like a dial. If you see an antique piece, you dialed the thing and the needle moved like this, and then it stopped. When you really tuned well, it stopped and suddenly started off by saying, "This is All India Radio giving you the news." And there was only one channel, no TV, only one channel of radio. Songs were on Vivid Bharati, but I'm talking about news. So another half minute of tuning. It took 2.5 minutes for me to get to the news. 2.5 minutes in your world, in today's world. 2.5 minutes. A sensational news goes viral in 2.5 minutes. Millions of posts and reposts on all platforms. Mention all the platforms. I can't even name all the platforms. So there are. This goes viral. When you post or repost a particular bit of news, let's say actor X does this, or minister this slaps so and so, something. Do you really cross check? Otherwise, in good mood. So, do you really check, or do you just repost it? Be honest, Sanya. Do you really check?
So I think that I pick up. I don't repost usually opinions, but like
Okay.
from somebody from a
Good.
news agency, I think. Yeah.
Very good. But what do most people do? The world just posts it. That's how it becomes viral. So, what I'm trying to get at is, when you have been blessed with so many enablers, your generation, when you are blessed with so many enablers, it is also incumbent on us. It's a moral responsibility to be discerning, to not post everything. Now, why did I bring that over here? I brought that up now. I'm sure you can all guess what I'm talking about. When we talk of, let me take some hard-hitting ones, cow vigilantism, or something that has happened somewhere where one community has attacked other community. Let me talk about some things which really grab your attention the moment you say it. How many times it has not happened that it has actually turned out to be false news, or at least exaggerated, or tinted, prejudiced, biased from a particular point of view. And hyper-nationalism gets a boost by such things. Hyper-nationalists get a boost. So we must remember that these tools, social media is an explosive tool in your hands. So you all are lucky that you haven't heard of radio, or you haven't heard a radio. You are lucky that you have things at the flick of your button, a flick of a button or snap of your finger. But then it is very important for you to understand. You meaning, when I say, I'm not talking of only few of you here, I am talking of your generation. It is incumbent on you to understand that don't become slave of this issue. All right. Having said that, I was hoping, why I stopped myself, why I stopped myself was, I was hoping that someone of you will connect this message up in your talk. So when that didn't happen, I just thought I'll bring this out. Okay, so all of you take a minute each and say something on this if you wish to. If you wish to pass, just say pass.
Uh, Sir, I would like to share this thing. Now, people won't believe, but a person like me, I am the part of the youth. I am not a part of Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or any other thing. The reason being not the reason being the basic distraction that a student might face. That is the basic reason. I would not say I was there and I was influenced by the toxicity. I would not say I was influenced by the toxicity or I saw the environment and then I quit those platforms because I thought that they were not really serving the purpose. It was for another reason. I have not been into that atmosphere myself, engaging my own energies into that. But what I have seen is most of the things that are in the national figure, any protest that goes on in the national figure, or any incident, most of the time things happen because something was posted on the media, another community. Most of the time the things happen like something has been posted on the media. It is a completely false information, but somebody else from the other community will try to pick it up, and do whatever they would like or want to do with it. Just like this noise is doing with us. This is how it goes. You cannot stop it. You want to speak something, but in order to explain to the minds what they're doing wrong, it is very difficult because we don't have at least a minute also to cross check, or even our sentiments get flamed too quickly. And as youth, I have experienced and seen in my own circle, the people get inflamed and triggered very quickly. There is lack of patience. There is lack of this feeling that there is lack of general responsibility. I would like to put it
All
this
right.
way. There is
All right.
lack of that.
Anima, thank you. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So that is exactly what I'm talking about. So if on and I'll just take a case because we'll be able to relate very easily to it. If you do post something about when it was happening, all of us know Sushant Singh Rajput's case. It goes viral. It goes viral because there's a pull of Bollywood, and we speak of other actresses who were involved, or about their being called by the law enforcement agency. So it is bound to make news. Is bound to go viral. Any development that takes place, but it doesn't really. I mean, let's not read the insidious part of it, layers. But otherwise, it does not really affect the country. It affects a few people who want to follow it, but it is not creating intercommunal tensions and things like that. But when we give vent to hyper nationalistic sentiment in this, when we talk about somebody being lynched from one community for a thing like this, like there was a case, and I don't remember the details where it was. There was a case where two people, if I remember correctly, were lynched because in their mini truck they said that they are carrying beef, where turned out to be that it wasn't beef at all. It was mutton. So the point is, when somebody starts off, then it's just a clarion call and everybody starts off. So that is where I was cautioning your generation, the younger people more than us, that we must not post and repost things, and we must be a little more sensitive to the issue. All right. Having said that, Anima, while you may not be on social media today, but when you start saying that, you are students, so some of you have decided to desist. But I'm talking of an average Indian young man or young woman, because people are there and people actually tend to post and repost. Right. Okay. Now I'm running a little short of time. So Anima has spoken. Instead of everyone speaking, if there's anyone who wishes to add or say something different on that particular issue, all right, Kushi and Sanya, I see you both. So I will yield the floor to both of you one by one, and then before we wrap it up, then I'd like to wrap it up. All right, Kushi.
Yes, sir. So, something that I've observed, like, the very design of these social media platforms, they encourage those tweets or those posts to get viral. So, for example, if someone posts something on their story, it basically depends on how many views they get. Or if someone posts something as a reel or IGTV, it becomes a matter of number of views till the time that the post gets viral. So what I've noticed with my generation is that we get like something that you also mentioned, that our attention span has also decreased so much that like despite of us having so many opportunities and so many sources to refer from and to check whether the news is correct or not, we still tend to fall for those things, and we tend to believe what we see on social media. So and a lot of it is being like I've seen on Instagram, like there are numerous pages coming up, and they like they paint themselves as news and media organizations, but they really aren't. They're basically promoting a propaganda, and their news is totally one-sided. So that sort of, and whenever, and the kind of algorithm Instagram and Facebook they basically support is something that if I suppose have sort of leftist views or centrist views, and I like some post, but I'll keep seeing those posts. So we live in that sort of an echo chamber that we're not exposed to any alternatives, even though
True.
we can do so with
True,
conscious
true,
effort.
Kushi. Absolutely, you're right. And not only you're talking of views, not only that, you will start, getting consumer items. You will get, they'll pop up in your windows. For me, I don't know how they find out, but they want to push their hair dye to me or something, which can color my hair and things like that. That won't
Yeah.
happen to you. So, so we live in that kind of world. Today, you utter a word to each other, you send a mail to and tomorrow you see an ad coming on that popping up in your email or on your other social media. I understand what you're saying, and so we live in that world. That's what I'm trying to caution you all against. But it's a dangerous mix when hyper nationalistic kind of developments or news or rhetoric, fake or exaggerated, that becomes dangerous, and that's where it doesn't make a difference when they push a product to each other. All right, Sanya, over to you.
Sir, regarding like adding to what Kushi said about the algorithms, I think it's also about news agencies and media as a source of like the fact that they get money. They're capitalist ventures, so they get money off of your attention and them this going around. So they basically monetize on your however emotive value you have. So basically they'll probably give it another angle just so that you share it. So even if you talk about like Muzaffarnagar riots that happened, it was a basic case of eve teasing that happened, but since you gave it like a religious or a socio-political angle, which is obviously like valid, I'm not invalidating that caused a whole, like that made it a riot state completely, where people lost lives because of this and gave birth to a communal tension. So when news agencies do that, so that people who are like fence sitters get in and hold a particular view, and when you share that, it becomes it's a little irresponsible on our part if we don't look at the listed sources, obviously, because they are so exhaustive. But I don't think that then you probably shouldn't share it and just keep it to yourself if you can't cross check it otherwise.
True. Very well put. And so all of us are actually coming out with a very similar theme. And the theme is that some topics, today's topic that we are discussing, is all the more explosive when mixed with the virality that internet and social media offers. So, and that is why your generation has to be mindful of this. Your generation has to be mindful of the ferocity that this social media can generate, and the sentiments that it can whip up, which can lead to loss of life. Is there anything that anyone else wants to speak about? Yes, Ashraf.
I have a question.
Ashraf first.
Sir, I would just like to extend what my other panelists like Khushi and Sanya just spoke about, that how this become very ferocious. And I'll just like give a practical example to it. Just recently we had Bihar elections, state assembly elections, And I would not highlight which political party, but then there was a group of people who were saying that we will vote for that political party because his videos are doing rounds and he has spoken obnoxiously very well on some context, social context. So this is where it has come, and luckily or unluckily, we don't see any government or action take place because this is somewhere benefiting the political section. So yeah, that's as I had already mentioned in my speech as well, that nationalism from the construct of social media is dangerous.
True.
Yes, sir.
True. So you see, maybe when you say nationalism, I am talking about especially about misleading ultra-nationalism, where one of you brought out that nationalist or ultra-nationalist is the one who will actually try to justify the wrongs of a country. If an Arab-Palestine issue is taking place, can you really want to um uh, want to harm another community? The national boundaries are not the issue. The issue is, do you want to live and live better at the expense of other community, or do you want to live in amity? That is the true issue. You see, let me. Okay, sorry, Anima. I think you wanted to say something before I.
No, sir, I just had a question in my
Mhm.
mind,
Go ahead.
which I wanted to ask. My question is that sometimes when people talk on social media and all other platforms, they talk about what could India do with its relation, in respect of the relation with its neighbor. What can be the course of action? People give a comment on that, and sometimes a popular wave of emotions come in the media on the course of action that India should take as far as issues related to neighbors are concerned. I wanted to ask, does this opinion of the people or large masses, if some things like this come up, does that have an impact on the defense forces, or if they would be definitely thinking what must be right and what is the truth of the situation? But a large number of people are not aware of that, but they're free to express their opinion on the course of action, and they do that. So does that have any impact on the way things are?
Uh, well, the short answer is no, it doesn't. And my mind goes back to last year when this there was this China India face off happening at in Ladakh, and I went up on the national media, the TV channels very often, uh, and debated. So, and I remember this came up a couple of times because people at large, and now I'm connecting to your question, people at large would say, um, always say, uh, we must attack them and we must do this. Why are we going this down? Why are we must have a surgical strike, and why can't we do this? Well, the 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 military leadership or the national leadership cannot go by how you want to feel. You are feeling nationalistic now, your blood boils, and we must do what is tactically correct or tactically feasible, what is strategically correct. Sometimes you have to bide your time, and I don't have to explain the reason. That is why we are the experts there. We don't have to explain now to everybody as to why we should not attack, when we should not attack, and how why we should wait our time and then maybe not attack here and attack there, or whatever else other actions are to be taken. And I remember, just like your question, I remember going on, and I will on a Hindi channel. I will not name the channel. Remember going on a Hindi channel where I was one amongst the 3 or 4 speakers, and there was a crowd seated there, and they asked a similar question, really. And I said, no, the decisions cannot be taken by public sentiment. You all are not qualified. Tell us. I mean, I didn't use this word. You're not qualified. You'll be surprised. One of the speakers, no, this is a democracy, and how can you say the public is not? Come on, democracy does not mean that tomorrow you are going to dictate the budget to the finance minister. You will say this should be the rate of interest, and we should not do this, and we should waive off this loan, and we should give aid to a so and so country. It cannot happen like that. So certain things, you have elected governments. It is not the time of kings and ministers who were supposed to be wiser people. Now you have elected a government. The government throws up the best people in those respective leadership positions, and they take a decision on behalf of you all because you've elected them to do that. So you cannot have someone just because of rhetoric, you start, come on, let's attack China. What do they think? No, this is not the way to do it. Okay. So you will agree with me that we cannot go and attack China just because there's a cacophony. We don't even understand the meaning of surgical strike. I was the Corps commander when we did it there. But when you say that against China, we must do a surgical strike, we don't even understand what we're talking about. So, okay, we'll leave that. I hope I've answered your question, Anima. No, we don't take decisions like that. Right.
So I have a question, although might be a
Sir,
little
thank you.
unrelated.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, what do you think of like when we talk about soldiers and martyrs? I think, sir, what do you like? I just wanted to ask you about what do you think about like? Do you think that this whole narrative of those lives being lost and the whole the fact that comes with it that it's like a sacrifice also sort of becomes a little toxic because you don't look at it as actual loss, but something as a sacrifice and more of a romanticized idea of it. Like, do you think that?
I'm not very sure if I got your question. Are you talking referring to Ladakh only?
No, sir, I'm just talking about it generally. Like when we
Yes.
talk, because you cited that when we were talking about it in the start about how soldiers are patriots, right? So,
Right.
do you think that also discounts it sometimes because we just dismiss it as a sacrifice or romanticize that idea of sacrifice, but never look at it as actual loss of lives? Do you think that idea
Right.
gets a little toxic?
No. For us soldiers, it's an occupational hazard. Every soldier who comes to serve with a concept of unlimited liability. He is prepared to give his life if required. His family is prepared for the fact that their son or father or husband may not return. And you can't put a price to it, and that is why it's concept of unlimited liability. What I'm trying to say is, and we have a very brave soldier whose window I just popped up and I see, hi Pile, the DPK, the very brave soldier here. I'm sure. Are you there for the next session? I think.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Yeah.
I've been listening to you. I've been throughout here.
So you suffered some of
No,
that, right?
very interesting.
And I'm sure he will also agree with me that we soldiers, we don't dismiss it. Who can value life more than a soldier? Because he puts his life out on line every time. And when a soldier goes, for everyone else, it may be another medal, it may be another homage ceremony and a lot of tweets. But what about his family? His family, his community, his extended family, everyone is plunged in doom. Their lives are shattered. So, no, we don't take it as just another thing. But yes, maybe I'll rephrase what you said, Sanya. That's a very good question. We don't let it come in the way of our executing the task. So much so that during an attack, I'm just fictionalizing an operation. Let's say an attack is going on or a gun battle with terrorists is going on. And if we have a certain number of people involved in that, if one or two of us get shot, it's a judicious call that leader has to make, that should I detach 8 people to carry these 2 people down because they are bleeding? Because if these 8 people go down, then maybe our numbers will be too less to overcome this enemy, whether it's terrorist or enemy situation. Or should we first do this and thereby risk them losing more blood? So we have to take very calculated call as to what is to be done. So it's a very professional and a specialized thing to be done. So to answer your question, it is not that we say, oh, it's okay and we go on. No, we lose a brother. This is a family. So, but we don't let it come in the way of our task, which is saving the country, which is saving the territorial integrity of the country. that is professionalism. That is real professionalism, that we don't let it hamper the task or accomplishment of the task. I hope I've answered the question. Within a few seconds that I have left, I am going to just say that remember we talked about nationalism. Hyper nationalism was our topic, and we spoke about all that. I'll leave you with a very good example of nationalism, and we as Indians should be proud of that. A very crisp example. At the time when India got independence, attained independence, Gandhiji was undoubtedly the most revered figure, father of the nation, and he sort of also made sure that he got out of a political thing. He did not vie for any position. Sardar Patel agreed to Gandhi's leadership and said, whoever Gandhi nominates. Sardar Patel was one very serious rival to Nehru to become the Prime Minister, the leader of this new nation. But he just deferred to Gandhi. All right, that calls for a lot. We must understand what I'm saying. It's very tough to understand. Next, Subhash Chandra Bose. His method of dealing with the entire thing, and he's put his lifeblood into it, lifeblood of his soldiers and his comrades into it. His methods were totally different from that of Gandhi and his ilk and others, and Nehru. But yet, he supported Gandhi, and he said, whatever Gandhi does, I mean, he just supported Gandhi. By supporting Gandhi, you are actually, that is nationalism. And the last example, which is very important, which some of you may not know, Dr. Ambedkar, he actually did not like all of them. He was not, when I say not like me, he did not like their policies, their way of doing things. He was not on the same side with all of them. And yet, when he was called to join the cabinet because the country needed him, he readily agreed. So you see, those were the giant leaders, tall leaders. They were the leaders of different, and I just pointed out a few differences to you. There were many more, but all of them came together to build this nation of ours under that one leadership. That is nationalism. What we are seeing today, some of it is hyper-nationalism, and we must be wary. You, the youth, have to carry that story forward. I wish you all the best, and thank you for your patience. Have a nice day and have a great life. Jai Hind.